Good. Well, we are here in session number 10. We're super excited, making our way through all of the terminology. You guys are becoming experts at learning about all the terms of commercial lending. Okay. So I think you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but I know we definitely got through loan to value. We spent quite a bit of time on debt service coverage ratio, if you guys remember that for sure. Did we get into recourse, guaranteed, non-recourse, et cetera, sell leaseback? Did we go that far? I don't even know if we got that far.
I think that, well, I know on my notes, we'd had a like recourse and non-recourse
Yep.
section before.
Yep.
So the next thing that I have on here is sales
Sell
leaseback.
leaseback.
And so we had finished at debt service coverage ratio.
Yep, that's right. Okay, good. Perfect. So let's just recap real quick, because again, this may seem a little bit repetitive, but I think it's necessary nonetheless, is tell me each, and I'll ask each one of you, Will, you can start off, but what do you remember about debt service coverage ratio, just in totality? Maybe obviously the calculation, but just some other things that might have come to memory for you.
Yeah, obviously this is what banks look at whenever they're giving out a loan, and the key number is 1.25, and basically what it is how much money you're bringing in versus how much money you're putting out. And that 1.25, like the 2.5, the extra 25%, I guess, is kind of like a cushion just in case something happens, so that way the bank feels more comfortable giving out that loan, just to know that, hey, if something does happen, they have a little bit of room to pay the payment. And I kind of wanted to go over this a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like I know what it is, but whenever getting into the details, like I know you have to add back like depreciation and interest and all that stuff, and then there's like income producing properties versus owner occupied.
Yep.
So I think I really just need a little bit more clarity
Yep.
on all that stuff.
Okay, that's good.
Because I get the general idea of it,
yeah,
some of the details,
Yeah, 100%. Okay, Lana, would you good with that too, Lana? Just if we go back through.
Yeah, I feel good with it, but I'm good to go over whatever. I can always make my notes better.
Okay, good. Let's do it. So let's kind of walk through, because again, I don't think this is it's a good thing to know, because it's going to matter for you guys. So let's try to walk through this on a sort of a little bit of a different perspective. So if I am a business owner, okay, and so there's really just two categories in my mind. You're either kind of a business owner or you're an investor / developer. Okay, so two categories. So business owner is the guy or gal that's basically saying, hey, I want to start my own company. I want to build this company, and I'm doing whatever, selling widgets, selling services, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm in business to, grow, generate revenue, hire people, run an operation, right? So in that operation, if I am the bank or institution over who's lending the money, I'm virtually saying, look, I want to, all my underwriting, all the things I'm looking at is all based upon your business operation. And the way I'm going to tell whether you are quote unquote a good business operator is how well you're performing, right? Are you making a profit or not making a profit in that business? Okay. And if you are making a profit, how much is it? And oh, by the way, if you want to borrow money from me, then do you have the ability to pay back the debt in accordance? Okay. So if I'm that kind of person, remember that the major thing that I'm going to look for as a bank to the business owner is I'm going to look at the tax return. And I'm going to ask for the tax returns, because that tells me the most legitimate thing I can, because if you filed your tax returns, probably had to pay taxes, hopefully. And then it shows me that those numbers are probably legitimate, okay? Versus if you just gave me a profit and loss statement that you printed off of QuickBooks, you could have made that up and you didn't have to pay taxes on that, okay? So when I get those tax returns, then I'm going to look at those tax returns and I'm going to say to myself, okay, how am I going to calculate whether he or she has the ability to service the debt? Okay, so when I go through that, I'm going to look, the very first place I'm going to look, which you guys are going to get some physical exercise doing this, okay, is I'm going to look at the net income. So remember that I'm always going to start with net income when I'm dealing with a tax return, okay? You guys tracking with me so far on that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm always going to look at the net income. And then what I'm going to do, in fact, I'm going to try to see if I can pull up. Let's see if Mr. Cotter can. Okay, so I'm going to get a little crazy here with you because here we go. Okay, so thankfully, so this is going to be part of your exercise in the future here. So I've sort of, you know, extracted this so that protect the innocent, right? So here's a tax return, okay? This is a corporate tax return right here for a company that we've worked with before. And if you notice, the very first place I'm going to look down here is the ordinary business income, okay? So here's gross sales or gross receipts up here, 3,899,646. Down here at the bottom, look at that. So there's his net income, 663,224. Okay. So now I have to add some things back to get to net cash flow on this business that we're dealing with. The first one is that I'm going to look at to see if I need to add it back or not is, see this one on line 11? Which one is that?
Rents.
It's rents. Okay. So the first question I'm going to ask, what am I going to ask this person when it comes to rents?
Are you going to be renting the same place that you were renting before, or whenever you take this loan, will you be moving to the new place that you're looking to purchase?
Yeah. I'm going to ask them and say, are you staying there, right? Or are you taking off? And oh, by the way, is all of this rent expense that you have in there, is it all attributed to your physical space rent? Or is it attributed to like rental equipment? I don't know. So you have to be curious and ask that question. Otherwise, you could potentially add back rent and it's not applicable, meaning that you don't, you shouldn't have. I mean, because maybe it's half of it's for it. Maybe they have 2 spaces even. Maybe they have 3 spaces they rent. So you just have to say, like, how many do you have now? How many should I add back? How many are you going to keep? How many are you not? Is some of this rent expense for equipment? So you really have to ask a lot of questions, okay? But let's just assume that you do, and you'd say, okay, well, I'm going to take the 663 and he's going to replace it. So I'm going to add the 271, 264, okay? And so now I've got that calculation. Now the next thing that I'm going to add back is line 13. What is that one?
Interest.
Interest expense. So Will, do you remember what it was, why we're adding interest expense back?
Other than it was in the video, I can't recall
Yeah, no worries.
why exactly.
So remember the calculation. It's really important you guys remember EBITDA. Okay, so remember EBITDA. So say it with me. I'm going to say it. Ready? Earnings before interest, here we go, taxes, depreciation, amortization, okay? So earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. And again, if I say EBITDAR, I'm going to add rent, right? So just EBITDAR is that rent, okay? So the way the calculation that you're trying to get to is basically EBITDAR, okay? So you're going to add all these things back to get to what they consider a pre-debt service cash flow. That's another way you can think about it. EBITDA equals pre-debt service cash flow. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So earnings before interest, taxes. So we're not going to add taxes back because it's a corporate, it's basically, if you look at the top, it's a S Corp type of tax return, an 1120S. And in an 1120S or a partnership tax return, you don't pay taxes at the partnership level. You pay taxes on your individual level. So if I'm a partner in this company and I receive a K-1 distribution of half of it, then I'm going to get taxed at my personal income level. Okay. So they call that no double taxation. So you're not going to get taxed twice. Okay. So that's why it's important. So you want to add back, you don't need to add back taxes on a partnership tax returns. There's individual. So you're going to add back the interest. You're going to add back rent. You're going to add back depreciation. And what's the depreciation amount on this one? Line 14.
7960.
Good job. And then it says amortization. And do you guys know what amortization is?
It's like how they decide like the payments that you'll be making, right? It's like part of the payments that you're making towards any kind of like debt that you have.
Yeah, good try. And you're correct, because amortization kind of has this duplicitous amount, okay? Meaning, or duplicitous term. So you could mean something different. So amortization is 100% correct. You were accurate in the fact that that's how you calculate the payment. Amortization that we're talking about on the tax return is actually how it's like, it would be tantamount to depreciation, okay? But here's what that looks like. If I bought a company, okay, and that company's tangible physical worth, meaning, furniture, equipment, was $1 million, okay? And let's say I buy it for $2 million. So that additional $1 million above and beyond the tangible assets is what's called goodwill, okay? And it's goodwill because it's just sort of fluff because there's no physical worth to it other than it's just kind of a number that we decided I was going to pay. And it's kind of like Coca-Cola's brand is worth $1 billion or whatever. But it's like, how did you come up with that? It's like, well, that's what it's worth. Okay, whatever. And so you pay for it, but the IRS allows you to quote unquote depreciate it. They just use another term, which is called amortization. So you can literally amortize that cost, okay, that you paid over a period of time. And so it's the same concept as depreciation. It's just not the same in terms of it's not real estate, okay? And so amortization allows you to sort of have this tax write-off, even though you're not really writing it off. You paid for it, but there really is no way. I mean, it's not even a physical asset. So it's like, okay, whatever. So that amortization, you're rarely going to see it on a tax return, but there are some times where you can amortize like fees. So if I pay somebody an origination fee, I can amortize it on my tax return. So you might see amortization for that. So you say, well, where do you find it, Dave? Because I don't see any amortization. Well, see where it says here on C statement 1. You're going to go down to statement 1 on the tax return. Hopefully they have it in here, but so you can kind of see down here, see where it says statement 1. Okay, down here in the tax return. So you'll look through all this stuff and see if you can see amortization on there. And you'll notice it's not. Okay, so there's no amortization. Like I said, 85% of the time, you're never going to see that number. But every so often, if someone has a complicated or big enough business, you'll probably see it on there. So you just want to double check to add that back in when you're coming to the conclusion. And then that number is the number that you're going to use to calculate the debt service coverage ratio based upon the loan amount they want to borrow. Okay. So does that make sense, Will, a little bit more?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for having you go over it
No,
again.
don't be sorry.
Because I know you went over it last session, but thank you for doing that.
No, don't worry about it. It's good to have some repetition and add some additional context to it. So, and remember something too, like we're not going to do deep dive on this stuff because you're going to get a lot of reps in the future sessions. So don't worry too much if you don't fully get the concept, because we're definitely going to, you'll hit it. Okay. And you'll get it. So recourse versus non-recourse. Why don't you guys take a shot at this? What do we mean when we say recourse versus non-recourse?
We're talking about if they have a personal guarantee in the loan or not. So whenever it's non-recourse, that's going to mean that the lender cannot personally go after the borrower, but there are like some carve outs to that. And then whenever it is recourse, then they can personally go after the borrower's assets.
Booyah. Great job. So Will, does that make sense? Like they're signing a personal guarantee, and that means that I always call it the noose around the neck, right? So they're going to come after you if you slip and fall. Okay. And
Yes.
if you have a recourse, then, I call it the sword versus the pillow, right? You fall, ouch, it's over, because they're going to foreclose on you and come after you. If it's non-recourse, it's, they don't. They're just going after the asset. Okay. The carve outs, as Lana mentioned, are fraud and negligence, right? All those little bad boy provisions. You will hear that a bunch, and you will hear borrowers will say, I want a non-recourse loan. It's like, well, you and everybody. So, and just so you guys know, if you're ever doing a small business loan, 95% of the time it's recourse. Okay. So it's just not a normative thing. If you're doing an income producing property, it's much more normal. Okay. Because you're dealing with life insurance companies, CMBS lenders. They do non-recourse loans pretty regularly. Banks do not. So just kind of know that that's, what's normative, what's not. So let's talk about sell lease back. What do we mean by a sell lease back? Why don't you take a shot at it, Will? What do we mean by a sell lease back?
Yeah. So if you own a property and you sell it to somebody, then a sale leaseback is whenever you lease that property back from the person you just sold it to.
Yeah, correct. So you're going to see this a lot in this industry where, they call it sale leaseback financing or, sale leaseback. Yeah, it's just, look, if I'm a business owner, I bought a property or I own a bunch of properties and I want to get all my equity out, I can try to refinance, but I'm not going to get as much equity. So I might say, well, I'm going to sell it and I'll lease it back and I'll stay in there and sign a long-term lease. I'll get a bunch of equity out of it, and I can operate my business. So it's a way that a business can capitalize his or her business. So if they say, well, I can go get a loan, but it's like, well, got a bunch of equity in your property, so maybe you could just do it that way. You could just sell it and then lease it back from that person for a period of time. Okay. There are people that will do this. There are companies that will do sell leaseback financing, where they will say, look, you want to grow and you want to grow fast. So we will continue to have leases signed by you, and we'll keep building your buildings if you have a good company, and we'll fund 100% of the cost. Okay. And they're like, whoa, that's a pretty nice deal. And so companies say, well, you got a good credit, you're a good tenant, we know you're going to pay on time, we have a lot of capital, so we're just going to keep funding you so you can keep growing fast, and then we'll go ahead and get a lease out of it. So there's companies who do a ton of that all over the country. Okay, so when we've done a bunch of it too, and it's a good type of financing. It's pretty easy because you just have one tenant. It's not complicated, and they're pretty straightforward to do. So they get competitive. So does that make sense? You guys tracking with that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So third parties, Lana, what do we mean by third parties?
Third parties are like different people who have a like hand in like the lending situation. Like it'll be someone who's like pest control or the phase one reporters and things like that. A lot of the times the lender will want to control who's doing the third party reports so that they can kind of have more of a hand in that side of it. And they're basically just to get like due diligence for the lender.
Exactly. And you'll hear this all the time where people say, we're going to do the third party reports. And it's exactly that. It's the phase one, it's the property condition assessment, it's an appraisal, it's an Alta survey, right? All these third-party vendors who are due diligence reports that they need back, market study, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all third-party vendors that are going to be hired. The bank will be the one who hires the appraiser and the phase one most of the time. I will just tell you, it's kind of a no-no for anybody but the bank. In fact, the bank can't even order it themselves. They have to have another company order the appraisal because there's regulation called FIREA, and they don't allow lenders to order it because they feel like there could be some bias going on. Like, well, you're having Jimmy do it for you just so you can get the appraisal you want back, so you can get that loan done. So we're going to make sure that you can't do that. So they'll have blind bids where this company will have the appraisers come back and say, well, there's 3 bids, but you don't even know who the company is. And here's the price and the time. And you just have to pick blindly. And then they'll go ahead and sort of proceed from there. It's a little annoying, but what are you going to do? And and then obviously you have to go through the process. So it's the normative, and it is something that the industry is sort of accepted. Okay, for banks. When you deal with life insurance companies, and you also deal with people like the CMBS, they're a little bit less strict on that. They can order it themselves. Sometimes even made suggestions. So they're just less regulated. So whenever I think of a bank, I pretty much call them a government entity because that's what they are. So,
yeah.
So it's just, they just operate with a lot more red tape. Okay. So zoning. So are we good on that? Does that make sense? Not too much there. But just again, verbiage, when you hear it, you kind of go, okay, makes sense. Zoning report. So Will, what is a zoning report? What do we mean?
Yeah, so it is a report issued to property owners, basically telling them what and how they can build on their property. I'm not sure who issues those reports, but that's what it is.
Yeah, it's usually the city, you know, or the county. They will basically give a report saying, here's what is legally okay to put on here per the zoning restrictions. And it's important to know because if something is non-compliant, that it's out of compliance for zoning, that could be a problem because the lender's like, well, gosh, I can't get the right insurance and you're out of compliance and you can't even have this kind of building and it's out of code. And so they'll make you do things to get it up to speed and up to code. So these are reports that will normally be done, not by banks, but it'll normally be done by like a life company or a CMBS lender-ish. They're the ones who are going to order zoning reports because remember that they're focused on lending against the asset, okay? Not as much the borrower themselves. So, you know, the bank is more worried about the business, right? They're not so worried about the real estate. Because if things go haywire, they're just going to go, hey, we're coming after you. And so we're not as concerned about your piece of real estate. So that's what a zoning report is. Again, not too complicated, just something you're going to need to understand because they will order it. Usually you're not going to be as involved in it. It's just a report that the city will issue to say, hey, you're in compliance, you're out of compliance. I remember buying a property, or I was going to buy a property, and it was an apartment complex. And I remember getting the report back and it said, no, you can't even have this many units on here. You're going to have to tear half of them down. And I'm like, see you later.
Never mind.
I'm buying that, you know, so it's, so you have to kind of do your due diligence, otherwise you're stuck. And then the guy acted kind of dumb, like, I didn't even know that was going on. I'm like, yeah, okay. So fair enough. Okay, so phase one report. Lana, what is a phase one report?
Phase one report is a report done by a professional environmental engineer, and it is basically to test the land and see what is going on basically like under the building. And with a phase one report, they usually don't actually end up like going and like messing with the soil or anything that's there. It's more so looking to see like what was previously there was like a laundromat or a gas station or something that's going to make it like a special use property. And then in phase two, they would go and like test the actual land itself and kind of dive into that deeper if it need be.
Booyah. Yeah, exactly. Spot on. It is exactly that. You hit the nail on the head. This is a report that you're going to order probably every time on refinances. I've told our guys, I said, look, you need to ask if they've gotten a phase one report because we've actually gone through the process in a refinance and realized they never got one. And when we got one, then we realized that when they bought it, they didn't do it. And they found out there was, you know, gas tanks under the property. And and that is a big ouch, because if you didn't do your due diligence, you're stuck with leaky underground storage tanks, which is called a LUST site, LUST. And it's like, you definitely don't want to be the guy who did it, because, you know, all of a sudden the local jurisdiction comes out and says, well, you got to clean this up. And you're like, well, how much is that going to cost me? It's like, well, $200,000 or $300,000, right? It's like, oh my heavens. So, you know, the due diligence up front to pay, you know, it's kind of like stepping over pennies to get $700 to get the pennies. It's like, you could have paid like $2,500 and saved yourself a lot of money. So,
Yeah.
You got to be real careful and make sure that those reports are done, but you're almost rarely, with the exception of a few times, not going to get a phase one done in there. And as you pointed out so neatly, is phase two is basically where they're going to bore into the ground and they're going to test the water table. A lot of times you'll see somebody do that if it was like an automotive repair facility, or sometimes if they had like a laundromat on there where they actually did the cleaning on site. They've had lots of historical issues around the chemicals getting into the concrete and then into the water table, which is like a big problem for chemicals in the water. And so they'll actually make you bore in, and it ain't cheap. I mean, it's, you know, it's 10 to 12,000 bucks to do that on top of the other one you did. And, you know, because they're the ones that take the liability, you know, they'll absorb it themselves, the company. If they give you a clean report and they actually, something comes back, it's kind of like buying an insurance policy, you know, at the end of the day. So just kind of know that that's something that will be, you'll need to know, and it'll be really important for you as well. By the way, if you ever try to read a phase one report, if you want to go to bed really easily, then start reading one, because you'll just literally knock you out. You'll go like, I don't even know what half the things are. And, it's a foreign language, but you know,
Me in a science class.
yeah, exactly. All I say is, look, just tell me what the summary conclusion is on page 5, and I'm good. You can do all the rest of it for me, because that's why you guys are so smart. Okay, certificate of occupancy. Will, what is a C of O, or certificate of occupancy?
Yeah, so it's issued by a local zoning department, and it basically tells you if the property meets all the safety standards and if it's safe to occupy.
Yep, 100%. Spot on. Yeah, just C of O. If you finish construction, city's going to come out, building inspector is going to check the property, and they're either going to say, hey, good job, Will, here you go, here's your C of O. You can now occupy the facility and you're ready to go. Or, sorry, you got to fix the toilet, you got to do this, and plumbing's not quite right. And then they got a big checklist of things that you got to do before you can actually get certificate of occupancy. So so that's why we'll hear a lot of lenders say, hey, we're not going to fund this, or we don't, you know, we're done technically when you get C of O. Okay, certificate of occupancy. That's what that means. So that just gives you some context when you hear that word C of O. That's what we mean. We're at the end of construction. Everybody signed off on it, and we're good to occupy the facility.
And so these are only issued on new construction, not properties that you buy.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I'll give you another example. So let's say that you buy a property, and you're going to, you know, renovate it, and you need to get permits through the city. Okay, that would be another way you'd have to get C of O. Let's say you bought a property and you're just going to put a tenant in there. Okay, and the tenant's going to do all the work. So they're going to go through the city themselves and build out their whole site. Well, they still have to get an inspector to come out and say, okay, well, is it fully in compliance with the city standards and the codes that we need in order for us to feel like it's safe for the consumer as well as you? And then at that point, you would have C of O. So those are some instances for that. So great question. Any questions on that as well? I don't want to move too fast, but I do want to keep us going. Okay, good. All right, net, or triple net. As I laughed one time, my wife, I had her read it and she didn't know, but because I'm so used to the verbiage, and she was reading my bio off and it said NNN. She goes, yeah, he does NNN. I was like, okay, this is great. I should have prepped her. You know, it's triple net, you know, and that was a big no-no on my part. So what is a triple net lease, Lana?
A triple net lease is where the tenant pays all of the property expenses.
Exactly. Yeah, the tenant is in this building. And remember, there's really 3 types of leases, right? Triple net, modified gross,
and gross.
Yeah, exactly. So those are 2 opposite ends, net, gross, right? Where the tenant is paying everything, taxes, insurance, management, repairs, any and everything common area maintenance. They're going to take all that expense on. And remember that the manifestation of that is either the landlord is going to say, you're going to pay this every month, and I'm just going to set an amount, and it'll just be part of your rent, which is pretty normal. or they'll say, we'll do it at the end of the year. Okay. A lot of times what they'll do at the end of the year is they'll reconcile to say, did you overpay or did you underpay? Okay. And then you're either cutting a check back or vice versa. Okay. So that's the type of lease. If you can imagine, if you're a landlord, quite frankly, you're going to want to triple net lease, right? You just would say, I want to get my check. I don't have to cut all these other payments, and we'll call it a day. Okay. Triple net types, by the way, if you're driving down the street and you see a CVS or a Walgreens or a Starbucks, you're getting your nice cup of coffee, then you'll realize that is a triple net lease almost 100% of the time. Okay. Modified gross, what is that all about, Will?
It's where the tenant and the landlord share all the operating expenses.
Yeah, exactly. And people say, well, how much? The answer is depends, right? It depends on whatever you negotiate. So sometimes the landlord says, I'll pay all the taxes and the insurance, and you're going to pay the utility bill and et cetera, et cetera. So it just depends. They're going to negotiate that depending on what it is. So a lot of times modified gross is a situation where somebody is, well, let me put it this way. If I have a very high demand property, I pretty much can command triple net. Okay. If I have a lower demand property in the retail space, then I'm probably going to be modified gross or gross, because I'm just going to have to do things to incentivize people to come to my property. Okay. So just remember that if you're in like a fritzy fancy place and, downtown Dallas or whatever, it's like you can kind of go, well, it's triple net, take it or leave it. We don't care. We got a whole line outside. Okay. Gross lease. So obviously, Lana.
The landlord pays for all of the property expenses and the tenant doesn't pay for anything.
Yeah, 100%. And just so you guys know, it's really important that when you do this, that you understand, I've had this happen multiple times. You got to get copies of the leases, because people always say, yeah, it's triple net, but it's not. And when you read the language, there's little, it's, they pay this, or, it's only up to this amount. And then if it's over this, then they have to pay it, So there's little nuances that you want to make sure to look at the lease to say, is it really triple net? Or is it just triple net up to an amount? Because sometimes companies will say, look, we'll pay the taxes, but if it goes above this percentage in the year, then we won't. We'll only pay up to this. So there's little negotiations you got to be real careful of when you're looking at the lease. Okay. Okay. Individually metered versus master metered. Will, what is that?
Yeah, so individually metered is where the tenant pays for their own power and electricity. Then master meter is the opposite, where the landlord pays for all the power and electricity.
Yeah, exactly. So think about this. So this is most of the times on what type of properties? What type of properties? Because remember, so if you look at, I'm always want you guys to remember, there's usually 4 food groups, typically speaking. So office, retail, industrial, apartments. Okay. So which of those 4 do you think this really is most applicable for?
Apartments.
Yeah, apartments. Yeah. So on apartments, that's where this will really come into play, because a lot of times the older properties will be master metered. They didn't go through and individually meter each unit. And so they'll have some big master metered thing. So where the landlord's gonna have to pay all the expenses. Now, let me just tell you this. Let me ask this, I should say. If I am a landlord and I have a master metered property versus a individually metered property, which one do you think I'd rather have?
Individually metered.
Individually metered. And why do you think that's the case?
Because I'm not having to pay an expense for their power and electricity.
Yep. And you guys hear that word called accountability, right? If I go into a hotel and I'm not having to pay that, bill for all of the air conditioning, do you think I'm like watching it like, okay, I'm gonna make sure because I'm not gonna have a big expense, and so you're less likely, if you're not cutting the check every month, that you're going to really watch that, right? Every month. So that's just, human nature. Versus if you are the one that has to cut the check every month, chances are you're going to watch it a little bit more, right? So individually. Now just know that most instances, water and sewer are mostly master meter in almost every situation. Okay. So that's really rare. Sometimes you'll see someone like sub meter a bunch of it, but it's, not that normal. So just kind of understand that.
Did you say sub-meter?
Yeah, what they'll do is I've seen it before where someone has this big master meter, and then they'll literally go put sub meters on each unit, and they'll kind of monitor like how much water, and then they try to delineate how much they're going to divvy up the expense.
Okay.
Sounds like a total nightmare. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah.
like, I don't know how you're going to do that, but some people are super anal. So I'm just like, okay, that's, you want to go through that exercise, that's
You
fine.
got it, man.
Better use of my time. So unit mix. What do we mean by unit mix, Lana?
So this is also predominantly apartments, and it is basically saying how many bedrooms and bathrooms there are in like any commercial property.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Just what's the unit mix? Is it, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 3-bedroom, 2-bath? They want to know because that just helps them kind of understand, is it competitive? Is it not? Et cetera, right? So it's a good thing for you to know. Most of the time, this can be on the rent roll. It should be on the rent roll, so people can kind of know like, oh, that's the unit mix for the property. Okay, so good job. Okay, broken condos, Mr. Will.
Yeah, so basically it's where a portion of condos are sold and a portion of them are leased. That's all I have on it. But yeah, where a portion of them are sold and a portion of them are leased.
Yeah, so this gets a little tricky. When you're dealing with a broken condo, okay, what's happened is somebody's built this condo subdivision, could be residential, it could be commercial, and they've gone through and the plan is, the original plan was to sell it all. Okay, so they wanted to sell the whole thing. And what happens is not all of it does. So they sort of do a couple things like, well, we can sell a portion of these and then they're going to rent it to people, or I'm just going to rent out a portion of it. So you have this kind of fractured condo where it's not like everybody bought their own condo in this subdivision, okay? And so what happens is I might go into the bank and I say, hey, look, there's a 100-unit condo, project or townhouse project, which means it's individually metered on each one, but it's plat. It's like a plat that on this big subdivision. And I'm going to buy 25 of them. Okay, so now I have 25% ownership in the subdivision. Okay, so the lender's like, well, that's a little bit problematic for me because what happens is if you default and I have to foreclose on these 25 units and I have to take them back and own it, then if all of a sudden the subdivision was not properly capitalized, meaning that didn't have enough cash in there, and they do a big capital call to say, hey, we need to fix all the pavement and we need to fix all the roofs. And so everybody's going to have to cut a check for, $2,000 per unit. And the bank's like, well, crap. You know, not only do we own these properties that we don't want to own, now we got to cut a check to the subdivision because it wasn't well capitalized, nor were they really doing a good job maintaining it. Okay. And so they call that a fractured or broken condo because you only own a portion of it. You don't have control and it can get kind of ugly. Okay. And so I've owned condos before. I'm not a big fan of them because that can happen. You don't have control. Like somebody could not pay their dues and then you just have this whole broken thing. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So just kind of understand that that's what a broken condo is. So what is an office condo association, Lana?
That is a commercial owner association, and it's a nonprofit that governs communities and condos or a combination of the two when they're used for non-residential purposes.
Exactly. Yep. It's just kind of understanding this became real popular back in like the 60s, where they're just like, well, we could kind of fracture and then people share the common expenses and we have this association and there's someone who's the board and et cetera, making decisions to keep the place clean. So look, it's a great idea. And people do it all the time. And, but it can get messy because, you know, somebody who's running it, you know, not everybody agrees. And they could make decisions where everybody's kind of like, in fact, my friend who's an attorney actually told me, he said, that's what he does. He actually is an attorney for associations. And he says, man, I got to tell you, it is a tough deal because people fight all the time in associations. It's just like battle. Yeah, it is. It's just like people getting these power struggles. I don't know. It's kind of fun, but you know, I wouldn't.
We actually have our HO here, and the guy who is like, he just became the president or whatever, he like just put his house up for sale, and we're all like, where are you going? What are you doing?
No,
You're the president.
What's going on? Why did you just do that? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's just there's just a lot of stuff around associations because everybody has vested interest, and understandably so, you know. Okay, anchor tenant, Will, what is that?
It is just referring to the largest tenant in the building complex, whatever it is.
Yep. Yeah, so think anchor tenant, think, I don't even know what they have. Who are the major, is it Piggly Wiggly or who's the major, like, you know, grocery stores out in Texas?
Walmart.
HEB.
Walmart, who else?
Like Texas or Target.
Target.
Oh, HEB.
Another, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. HEB. Yeah. So out here it's like Fry's and Safeway and Albertsons. Blah blah blah. So like anchor tenant is just that. It's like, hey, you anchor the center. You're gone. Half the tenants are like, well, I'm not. You know, I can't do business anymore because I was drawing all the traffic from you. For crying out loud, people are coming to get all the groceries and they're like, oh, there's a hairstylist, you know, so that's the power of an anchor tenant, and lenders kind of like need to know who's the anchor, how long do they have left, are they solid or not, are they in distress. They're going to spend a ton of time wanting to know a lot about the anchor tenant because if they go away, you know, it's like poof, your whole thing just turned upside down overnight. Single use or special use property, Lana.
Property where it's basically only going to be used for what its original intended use was. For example, like with a gas station, how they have the tanks underneath, that would be really inconvenient for anyone else to occupy that property. So that would be more of a single use, special use property.
Exactly. So yeah, gas stations, car washes, bowling alleys, you know, all these things. It's like, oh, that's a special use property because there's not a lot you can do other than like hotels, things like that. So good job. And just remember one thing to notate on those, typically they're higher risk for a lender because again, if they take it back, they're sort of like, it's stuck. I've got a car wash, you know? And so they're always going to go, well, We're going to do lower loan to value, higher debt service coverage ratio, shorter amortization, right? Like they're just trying to, cover their hiney. So, okay. So, cap rates. Will, do you know what a cap rate is?
Yeah, it's basically the projected rate of return on a commercial real estate property. And the thing with these is that it's kind of a good way to compare different properties, but you shouldn't rely on this as your sole, I guess, sole way of kind of getting an idea of what the property's worth. You should obviously look into all the other aspects, but yeah, it's just a projected rate of return on that specific property.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, cap rate it's a little bit of a complicated thing because everyone's like, what's a cap rate? It's like, well, it's rate of return, but there's so many things that go into it. It's like, where's it located? What's the condition? And, who's the tenant? And, all these different things. How good is the access going in there or not going in there? So there's just lots of factors that go into the capitalization rate to determine that. But it's basically supply and demand. If I've got a Walgreens that's in downtown Scottsdale and right on the corner of Kierland, that cap rate's going to be lower, okay, because you're getting a lower rate of return because you supposedly have a less risky asset, right? But if I am in Globe, which is way out in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, and it's like Joe's in Sally's barbecue shop, who's not a Walgreens, I'm probably going to get a high rate of return because I've got a risky location and a risky potential tenant. So I'm risk versus return, right? I'm always like, if I'm going to get a higher return, probably going to take a higher risk, right? Lower return, lower risk. So just kind of think in terms of that. But, cap rates are definitely been compressed for a long time. They've been low. And now that interest rates are going up, guess what's going to happen to the cap rates? They're going to go up, right? Because if I buy a property that I'm getting a 3% cap rate and my interest rate is 5%, got a bit of a problem, okay? Because I'm paying more in my capital rate than I am the actual return on my property, okay?
So do they kind of mirror interest rates, or is that kind of far-fetched?
Thank you.
Yes-ish, meaning it's not one for one. What'll happen is as rates go up, just walk through the simplicity of this. So interest rates go up, okay? My cost of money goes up, okay? And therefore, my debt service coverage ratio when on the normal 75% loan to value that I would have had to do on that property goes down because it means I have to put more equity in, okay? Because that the ratios didn't work anymore. If I was buying a property and I had 3% money versus 5%, I could have more purchasing power, okay? If my interest rate goes up, I have less purchasing power because now all of a sudden my cash flow gets constrained, okay? So what happens is if I have to put more money down, then the supply of buyers starts to diminish. Because if it was like I had to put less money down, then more people are like, cool, I can do that. But if I had to put more money down, it's like, well, I don't have that much money. Okay. So you have less people, which means less demand for the property. Okay. And then if there's less demand, you have less bidding. And then all of a sudden the property's like, well, I won't pay that much for it. And so the prices kind of naturally compress. By the way, this is what they're trying to do right now in the economy. They want to kind of create some equilibrium in the housing market. And I've already seen in like quite a few states, that You know, people are dropping their prices, like 50% of the properties are all dropping their prices. Because again, you just have less people buying. Is that a good thing? I think so. I think so. Because again, I mean, I talked to a couple of gals the other day at, was buying some flip flops, and they're just like, man, my rent on a 1-bedroom apartment is like, you know, $1,800. You know, it's a lot of dough. You know, so it's just at some point it's just too expensive. So it's good to monitor and kind of see how economics play out. So. Okay, one more, and then we're going to wrap it up for the day. Occupancy. What is occupancy, Lana?
It's just the percent of the building that's occupied.
Yes, 100%. Pretty simple. Vacancy, occupancy, all right? It's just one versus the other. And so, yeah, so good job on that. What we're going to do, guys, we are going to wrap it up next time on this stuff, okay? So let's try to wrap all this up, and then we'll continue on our next stuff, which we're going to start getting into sort of the application process, which kind of gets fun as we start diving into it. So great job. Proud of you guys. You're making good progress, and excited to see you, I guess, Thursday, right?
Yes, sir.
Thursday.